Hey everyone, it's Mr. Drake. If you're one of my students, we just finished studying the media, which has a major impact on the government and on the political process in the United States. And we're now going to start looking at another institution in this country that has a big impact on public policy and the government, and that is the collective institution of interest groups. So by the time this video is over, you should be able to define what an interest group is and what a lobbyist is and what a lobbyist does. Also be able to explain why interest groups exist and why they exist in much larger numbers in this country than in a lot of European countries, and also explain why they've increased in numbers so much in the last half century or so. You should also be able to describe the difference between the two main types of interest groups, which are membership interests and institutional interests. So let's get started. So let's start off by talking about what an interest group actually is. It's an organization of people or an organization of other organizations who have similar goals to one another, who enter the political process in a variety of ways that we're going to talk about to try to achieve their goals. Now, these organizations are headquartered all over the United States, but most of them, especially the big ones, have a representative in Washington, D.C., or have an office in Washington, D.C., in the center of government, so that they can have more of an influence on policy by interacting with politicians and other power brokers in the nation's capital. Traditionally, these lobbying shops have been located on K Street, which is a few blocks north of the White House and the Capitol and all the other government buildings. So collectively, sometimes you will hear the interest group institution in the United States referred to as K Street. So that's why you are seeing that picture there. Interest groups are different from political parties in that they don't run candidates. Okay, they can support candidates, and a lot of interest groups, in fact, most of them have political action committees that donate to candidates who subscribe to their particular beliefs and agree with the interest group's philosophies. Most interest groups also tend to focus on one specific issue instead of a wide range of issues like a political party will. Like political parties, most of them, the major ones, will have, views on abortion and views on higher or lower taxes and views on environmental regulations, for example. But the Sierra Club, which is a large interest group in this country, cares pretty much exclusively about environmental issues. So they have one area on which they focus. Now, the people within interest groups who actually try to affect change in policy are called lobbyists. The term became popular in Great Britain in the 19th century because there was a large Great Hall or lobby outside the Houses of Parliament where people would try to essentially intercept members of parliament as they were coming in or leaving and try to convince them to vote in a particular way. And the practice of doing that became known as lobbying. So the term sort of has made its way into the American lexicon as well, and refers to people who try to get politicians to vote a certain way or support a certain policy or course of action. A lot of times lobbyists are full-time employees of organized groups, and they operate out of the office in Washington, D.C. that group has. A lot of times lobbyists are lawyers who have some experience in actually litigating to get policy changed. Sometimes lobbyists are former politicians themselves. It just kind of depends on the group and the lobbyists. But the lobbyists try to persuade public officials to vote a certain way, but also try to educate and help them. They'll often give policy papers to politicians and ask them to look over them and understand the intricacies of particular issues, and through that try to change the way they vote or get them to support their policy that they're advocating for. Now, especially compared to European countries, the United States has a ton of interest groups. In this class, if you're one of my students, we'll talk about 30 or 40 to some degree, but that won't even scratch the surface in terms of the number of total interest groups we have in this country. There are many reasons that there are so many. The first main reason is diversity, that this country is just so diverse in terms of people's ancestry and religion and, political tilt and all of that, that all of these interest groups sort of pop up to represent all these very, very diverse interests, and that's happened steadily over the nation's history. Another reason is segmented government. Because we have three branches of government, the executive branch with all the bureaucracy and government officials that come with that, leading up to the president, who's the head of the executive branch. You got Congress and all of those different members of Congress in the House and the Senate. And then you've got the courts as well, from the federal district courts all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. So you have a lot of what we call access points to become involved in policy making or trying to influence public policy. You can, if you're a lobbyist, try to get in with a member of the executive branch who has the ear of the president or vice president who can try to push a particular policy point. Or you can lobby and schmooze with a congressman, or you can send briefs to judges that sit on federal courts. All of these things we're going to talk about in this class to a degree, but that sense that there's a lot of different ways to interact with politicians and affect change led to a lot of interest groups being created to do just that. Also, weak political parties, which we've talked about in this class quite a bit, but in a lot of countries, this sort of lobbying and trying to get things done in government is done through the political parties. But in the United States, since the parties don't have a lot of control over the politicians who, at least in name, belong to them, you see lobbyists just going around the political parties and just skipping that step altogether and trying to interact with the politicians directly. In terms of how interest groups are organized and who they represent, they fall into two main camps: institutional interests and membership interests. Institutional interests are groups that represent other organizations or businesses. Some examples of this might be, there could be an interest group of textile mills or an interest group of car manufacturers. And what the interest group would try to do is convince government officials or lawmakers to create policies and laws that would benefit car manufacturers or textile mills, what have you. There's also membership interests, which are voluntarily joined organizations that regular people who feel the desire to can join. Some examples of these might be the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the National Educators Association, which advocates on behalf of teachers. Now, these groups advocate on behalf of all teachers and all African Americans, even though not every teacher is in the NEA and not every black person in the country is in the NAACP. But the people who join are the ones who have that sense of activism, the idea that they can, through hard work or bringing attention to issues, can affect change in policy. That'll do it for this video. This is, again, just intended to be a brief introduction to interest groups. And if you're one of my students, we will be talking in a lot more detail over the course of this unit about how interest groups actually operate and how effective they are in getting things done and making change occur in this country. As always, feel free to ask if you have any questions. Cheers.